Hey, everybody, welcome to another episode of, I almost said Childcare Bar and Grill, but this is actually That Early Childhood Nerd. And I'm Heather Brent Santi, and Mike Huber is on the show today.
Hello.
Hello, Mike. And we were just talking about the Childcare Bar and Grill, so there's a reason that it was in my brain, I guess. So we're going to do another episode. We haven't done one of these for a long time, it feels like, where Mike has listened, this time on my request, to some episodes that I did for Childcare Bar and Grill with Childcare Bar and Grill about schema play theory. It's something I'm thinking about a lot lately. And these episodes where you make me talk more about what I said on a previous episode are really helpful for me. So thank you for being willing to do that.
Sure.
So the quote that we're going to start with is just sort of general schema stuff. So and this is from a book called Understanding Schemas in Young Children, again, edited by Sally Featherstone, and it comes from the UK. She's English. So the quote is, babies and young children are methodical, systematic, and logical as they gather information through their senses and movement, and as they interact with people, objects, and the environment. Knowledge and understanding of schemas enables practitioners to support and challenge children's thinking, their ideas, and their developing concepts. The end of the quote.
Okay.
So
Excellent.
what do you want?
Well, it's funny because I was going to ask you two different ways, but with that quote, I'm going to go a different direction than I thought I'd start with. But one thing, as sort of an outsider that does find what I know about schema theory to be useful, but at the same time, what worries me is that I can see people taking it to only be about cognition, only about how a child thinks. Yeah. And that quote just made me feel that way even more. Because we're challenging the children on how they think, not on how they move, how they interact with materials, which to me, one, I will say, I was just telling you beforehand that my hive mind, teaching with the body and mind, so there's 4 of us, we talk about children think through movement. So when you say to a child, stop moving around, stop fidgeting, whatever, we're saying stop thinking. And I worry that for some people, they can take this idea of schema, and we should talk more about what it is soon. But I do worry that people are thinking that it's only about thinking versus how children are moving, which that's to me the most freeing part about the theory is allowing more movement. So just curious, how do you find others having that issue, like sort of taking it to mean I'm focusing on?
I do. I mean, I still don't interact much with people who use the theory a lot. It's still pretty, I think, superficially understood in the States. So definitely, I do think that some people take it and read about the neural pathways that come from the repetition of schema play, the strengthening of those neural pathways, and all of the math concepts and language that children experience when they engage in different schema explorations. But one of the things that I do really think schema could be useful for is that supporting the movement and the physical development. Some of the schemas, transporting, enclosure sometimes, orientation and perspective, find children or what we see children doing when they explore those schemas is very much moving their bodies and being very active and in bigger ways than just sitting and playing with one, counting bears or something.
Right.
And so that's one of the things that I think schema play theory can be really useful for, is bringing movement back into our thought processes and the ways that we support and plan environments for children.
Yeah, good. So in a way, so it's a little bit like the right. Like I feel like when Reggio was the buzzword, a lot of people bought baskets.
Yes,
and then like we're good. We've got baskets and maybe some pine cones or something.
Yeah. If I start hearing programs call themselves schema inspired, I might explode.
Right. Yeah.
Because that's what they do with the Reggio. We know we're not fully, you've called us out. We're not fully Reggio, but we're Reggio inspired. We have baskets.
Right. Exactly.
And we call our teachers different words. Yeah.
That's right.
Sorry.
Oh, yes, that's right. I forgot what the word is.
I know.
Yes.
I can't either remember.
Well, if we use Italian words, then
then we must be. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So well, that's good to hear, because like I said, that is like my biggest fear. So you as a teacher, or when you're talking to people who are working directly in classrooms, like how do you explain to them that this is something worth doing or thinking about?
Schema play in general?
Schema play in general.
Piece? Oh,
just schema play in general, because to me, I mean, in a way, I mean, the theory itself is that kids are already doing this.
Right.
It's the teacher understanding it, and then what does the teacher do with that?
Yeah. So well, again, and this is sort of just a language trick that I appreciate about this, is that if I can call it schema play theory, people for whom just saying children deserve play click on a different part of their brain than when I just say children need play, they deserve it. We have decades of research. So right. For people who aren't quite convinced that they can have a rich, quote unquote, program for young children where play is the main thing.
Right.
I've seen a better connection talking about schema play. And so I usually just talk about how it's patterns we see in the way children play. And it's, based on the work of Chris Athey and many other, a few others after her, mostly in the UK. And mostly my pitch is, if we can start to identify and ourselves become comfortable with looking for those, then it's easier to sort of accept that there is learning happening while children are playing, and that it's not just from the shoulders up kind of learning. It is the whole body. So for some, I have to make connections between like orientation and perspective, for example, is when children experiment with positioning, and sometimes it's their own body hanging upside down and going up the slide instead, or coming down the slide head first instead of feet first, or whatever. Or things like transporting, where sometimes they're moving things that are quite heavy and giving their body that kind of work. Really, you can connect that to the things that the skeptics find important, like, well, that's building up proprioception, and you want them to have proprioception for later sitting in a chair and writing things. You can make those connections for those who need that piece of it. But in the process, they kind of also start to appreciate play more. The argument that got them was an academic argument, essentially. But as they engage in it, then they start to see lots of different ways that children are
you're giving the academic argument so that they can kind of, I can settle down. And in some ways I think of it as why, like, you don't need the worksheet to do this. You need the worksheet of which is, is the duck on top of the table or under the table, or having kids climb on the table, go under the table, right? Is that, I mean,
yes, under the table is a big one. And we can still, if we feel like we need to have a more active role than just allowing it, supporting it, and planning, making sure materials are there for it. If we need to have that more active role, we can be narrating, as, oh, you're under the table, and offer that stuff that maybe we thought could only be offered on a worksheet before we started thinking about this one.
Right. Yeah. And so in some ways, I guess for me, it helps to think of it as a lens to look at. Because like when you talk about going upside down on the slide, or just going upside down in general, I immediately go to the like senses and sensory things of right away. I was thinking vestibular sense, getting your body in different orientations, and I'm even using the schema word, I guess, but but I'm thinking of it, how is that affecting the fluid in the ear and the child getting, that input, that sensory input,
Mhm.
which for me, sensory input is finding that balance of how much do I need to be exciting enough to do it,
Mhm.
and then how much is too much, and finding that balance. And things can get boring if I don't have enough sensory input,
Uh-huh.
or I lose attention. I mean, when we say boring, what we mean is brain activity literally slows down when children sit still.
Yeah.
And so it's just interesting to think of that. It's just a different lens. And what I like about having all these different, well, what I can find a little intimidating, but also really interesting is the list of different things. But what I like about it is it then, if for someone who's not prone to it, to be curious.
Mhm.
Like, gee, is that enveloping or enclosing?
Mhm. Yeah.
And in some ways, it doesn't matter if you're appreciating it,
Right.
but then it can help you with what materials might be good to bring in now.
Yeah. I think I'm really excited about schema, this theory.
Yeah, please tell me.
And I love to talk about it, but for my own perspective, I love it because it deepens what I'm able to observe with young children. It deepens my own understanding of what they are already competent in, what they are interested in. It helps me understand that more deeply. Like, so if a child's throwing something and I just say, oh, he loves throwing, I'm going to bring in a lot more balls or something. That's kind of a superficial observation. But if I look at, oh, he's throwing under, or he's really trying to throw into, or he's throwing something that's heavy and then throwing something that's lighter, and I'm looking at it as a trajectory schema,
right,
and I can support it much more deeply by having those different things and allowing it to happen.
Mm-hmm.
But also, I think it's such a good tool for sort of coaching adults for advocating for play.
Sure.
Like,
Okay.
I think that's where I really
so say more about that. How
yeah.
would it be? So what is someone going to do on Twitter or
Yeah.
I'm assuming when you say advocacy, that's what I think of as
Oh, well, it sure could be. Sure could be.
But whatever, however you meant that. What do you
Yeah.
mean by advocating for
Yeah.
play?
So for one thing, I think teachers struggle not so much with accepting play themselves, but struggle with what other people will think and say if they're just, quote unquote, doing play in their classrooms or just allowing children to play. And I think schema theory gives them a very tidy vocabulary to use and an easy framework to use to help other people see what's happening and why they're allowing all play. But I also really strongly believe that if we're going to make changes regarding specifically the academic pushdown, we need families on our side. We need families to know what kinds of things to look for and ask for and demand, instead of calling the child care program and saying, do children learn there or do they just play? Or how do you get my child ready for school?
Yep.
I think that this could be used to educate families too.
Sure.
And that's a term I have a complicated relationship with, educating families, but give them that same sort of easy framework to start to see play is deeper than I thought it was.
Right.
And maybe then they start asking, how much time do children play? or what's your philosophy about play, instead of, well, how do you get them ready for school?
Right. Yeah. And the nice, like, so when I think about it with schema, we're talking about different things that children will already do, and we can be giving them materials and whatever type of interaction if they need it, to help them, encourage them to do more or go farther with it.
Yeah.
So therefore, if a parent understands that, they're going to be like, oh, good. So wait a minute, why are they only playing for 1 hour a day?
Yeah.
Shouldn't they be playing for 4?
Yeah. That's my dream.
Yeah.
Yeah. So my coworker at the Purdue preschool, the SLP that I worked with in the preschool, has a toddler, and we haven't worked together for a year or so now, but she still will send me pictures of like weird stuff he does and ask me what schema that might be. And I love those conversations. And most recently it was like he had his water bottle, and then it looked like maybe a dry spaghetti some kind of stick stuck into the water bottle, and then like a donut hole or something
Right.
popped onto the top. And it would really be easy to look at that and say, this is meaningless. This is just weird.
Right.
What is he doing? But it could be transforming. It could be position and orient, position and ordering. It could be connecting and disconnecting schemas. And
I find to be honest, I find when I work with teachers in my program, it's snack time or lunchtime that I feel like they could really use, like when the kids are crushing the crackers in their cup, putting in the milk.
Yeah.
And then they
or their
drink
peas, smashing their peas and putting it in the milk. That's another popular one.
Try it and then like, oh, this tastes horrible. But to appreciate the thinking that's going on, the transformation, and all that, and appreciating that versus stop playing with your food.
Yeah.
And I know there can be a balance with wasting food.
Right.
Things. I don't want to
right.
downplay that, but at the same time, sometimes there are kids who will crush things and actually eat them too. Or, if it's a worry about food, then it'd be like, oh, let's find something else to, mix together. But, but I see that all the time, and teachers that's a time when I really see teachers not appreciate it.
Yeah.
And granted, or other times when it's not the play time, in their head, whatever, getting ready to go outside, putting it's not winter anymore. Finally, we've had a week of spring so far here in Minnesota. But, kids aren't putting on snow pants anymore. But when they were, there would be a lot of play. Sometimes the trajectory, of throwing my hat across the
or
way,
just up in the air,
or up in the air, or if they have stretchy, elastic, like pulling on it and letting go and watching where it goes, and enveloping something else besides where the snow pants are supposed to go. But or like, can I put the snow pants over my head? Won't that be interesting? So that's the times when I see teachers like, wait, this is supposed to be, we're just getting ready to go do a thing. We're not, this part isn't like, this is wasted time sort of thing versus, the thing we're going to do.
Yeah. Well, and that's one of the other things that I see really connecting when I talk to people about schema play and the different schemas, which we haven't really defined or listed, but maybe we'll do that here in a minute. What the schema
I made a note, like, do you trust your listeners are so nerdy they've already
some of them
either knew it or they Googled it?
I'll do it in a minute, but I don't want to forget this piece. It connects, and it's another lens to see what we would typically call misbehavior and sort of see it in a different way. So like, I think especially about trajectory, or connecting and disconnecting, like knocking down a block tower could be a connecting and disconnecting schema and not a mean child. So it gives us another sort of filter to go through when we pause, which we should pause before we respond to something that we are inclined to define as misbehavior. If we have an understanding that this might instead be a child exploring a schema, then what, I'm not saying that we let a child throw a heavy unit block through the air and we don't do, we just say, oh, that's just trajectory and that's cool. But it helps us, again, like if we want to redirect specifically, what was it that he was exploring or she was exploring when that block? So it helps me make a better connection to
like, so what can they test trajectory
they test this with? Yeah.
So what the heck is schema theory, and what are these? We've been saying some of these terms. Transporting stuff.
I think maybe it was in the 70s, Chris Athey in I think she's English, was doing some observations, some research, and discovered that there were repeated patterns she saw in children's play, and she identified over 40, but she sort of narrowed it down, or we have since then, I guess, sort of narrowed it down. And there's lots of other I guess great minds who have written about it and researched it a little bit. But so typically here in the States, I guess I'll say, what I see us really zooming in on in terms of the schema is transporting, trajectory, transforming, which is my favorite, one of my favorites, rotation and circularity, enclosure and enveloping, connecting and disconnecting, positioning and ordering, and orientation and perspective. And so just like, so as an example, I've told this story a lot, so people may have heard this one, but we did have, and people get nervous when they hear repetitive play. You probably know that from your own work, but we had a child whose parent was really concerned that all he wanted to play with was trucks. And she interpreted that as a red flag that maybe he was autistic.
Right.
And so she was very worried, and that led her to asking us to not let him play with trucks so that he would go out and do other kinds of play. And I wasn't willing to do that without trying some other things first. So we just thought, well, what if this is a rotation and circularity thing for him? What if it's the movement of the wheels that's really attractive to him and that he's exploring?
Right.
So we added rotation wherever I could think of. So like in the art space, we had rollers for paint, and we put cars at the easel so he could drive it through the paint instead of using a paintbrush. And outside we added an extra wagon, and in the dramatic play, we put a stroller. And in the water table, we had the water wheels. And he still preferred trucks, but he went out and he moved out and he played with some of those other things that we had added to the other areas. So that's just sort of confirmed for me that it probably was a rotation and circularity schema that he was exploring.
Right.
And then that opened up sort of the value of all those other areas of play.
Sure.
But still met that need he had.
Yeah. And I have to just interject with, and I know you only gave part of the conversation, but then the concept of neurodivergence, I think, is another thing that we shorthand. And the idea of neurodivergence, Judy Singer was the person who coined the term. Her whole point was, rather than thinking of things as the bad disabled thing and the good thing, and then we have red flags to know if the bad thing might be happening, we think of, oh, there's a lot of different ways of thinking in this world. Divergence or diversity, so neurodiversity. And neurodivergence just means there's a less typical way of thinking of things. And so when we think of, oh, a child is playing with one thing over and over, they might be autistic, they might not. There's also, we talk about a spectrum, and it's not a linear spectrum, it's a radial spectrum. So it might be more about their really, I guess you could think of it as play schema. It could be about their sensory, it could be about their social things, and it could be all of those. But just that idea that being okay with it. And I know, working with parents, I work with a lot of parents who are finding out about their children. There is a grief process that happens in a denial of who their child might be. Because if your child is something, like if your child has another condition that doesn't allow them to walk, not giving them a wheelchair doesn't make them walk. And if the child had been hyper focused for some neurodivergent reason, they're not going to lose the hyper focus just because you keep them from doing it. Right. And in fact, if anything, that might they might learn to mask that about themselves, but that creates mental health issues. Other problems, I just had to throw that in there just because for people listening who don't work with as diverse a population in terms of neurodiversity, I just want to throw it in there. Because that was a very small snapshot of what was going on with that family and child. So I appreciate that. So one thing that I'm curious then, so I'm not a skeptic at all. I don't want to say that. Well, what I love is that there's like Chris Athey. Like had all the 40 different ones. And I understand too, that's too many to when you're in the classroom, like, oh, that's, whatever, going through that long list. so I appreciate that. And in some ways, to me, it's less important, even figuring out, is that rotation or position is less important than they're doing something. Something's going on in them, in their body and brain that's really interesting. And I want to support that.
Yeah.
And Schema gives a good way of, like you said, trying out all those other, the art thing, different things. And then if you were wrong, you might have then tried, oh, is it more about transporting and whatever?
Yeah.
And tried a different one. So it gives a way of thinking about it. But I'm curious, because so much is about interacting with objects or your body. What I haven't seen from my little knowledge is more about like social connection.
Oh, yeah.
And because I feel like there's things kids do naturally to try to connect socially. So like some of the obvious ones, chase. You could go anywhere in the world and you see somebody kind of go near someone and then start to run and then look back to see if the person's chasing. And you can do it with a dog, or you can do it with other animals even.
Yeah.
But you can do it with a human, and anywhere in the world you will find another kid who will start chasing you, and you'd never have to speak a word. And then the kids who tell fart jokes or whatever too, because it gets a reaction. But there's something, but there's like, it's a pretty universal thing. It might not be farts, but whatever is going to drive the adults nuts and make the kids laugh, they're going to do. So I'm just curious if Schema gets into that at all, or is that just a different type of?
A little bit. I don't think that's a really interesting direction to think. There is some that I haven't read everything ever written about Schema. There is some conversation about the social.
But you've probably read more than anyone else.
Everything I can find so far. Yeah. I've highlighted. So there is some discussion of social value, or social, how do I want to say this? The ways it can impact social interaction. For the one that comes to mind, and this is maybe the most simplistic for me right now, but the first thing that comes to mind is just that children's social interactions are deeper when we allow them to play and follow their own ideas than when we sit down and try to plan something and make them do things with us. So I think that if children are out there playing, and inevitably then if they're playing, we will see, and not every child shows like obvious schema explorations, like for the one child I talked about, circularity in rotation was a whole thing. But for some children, we just see moments of it, not a whole pattern. Anyway, they're going to be choosing to interact with others. I think when we see deeper communication exchanges, different levels of language use during that kind of play than we do during organized adult-led activities or even play-like activities. So I think in that way, there's a great social impact and way of looking at it. And I think I was thinking maybe I could make a connection right now to taking others' perspectives, but I'm not quite ready to expand on that. I need to think about that. But I think there's probably some perspective taking in there for social consideration.
Yeah, no, I was just interested in that because and I totally get like a lens, just like when I do a sensory lens, it doesn't have a lot about connection, social connection with kids too. So each lens won't do everything. That's why we, as teachers, need multiple lenses.
Yeah.
But I was just curious about that because there's so much about connection. And a lot of these terms you could also use as a social connection, social orientation.
Yeah.
Social, maybe positioning. I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, but having to sit next to their friend.
Yeah. There is.
There's something there that's
positioning in order. Yeah, there is, like who do I get to sit by? Who do I get to be by? But that's also like when children are having to move in lines, or when one child races to be the front of the line all the time, and we assume that he's like selfish and whatever, but really he's just about positioning and ordering.
Right.
So there is some element of that. I think when they pretend together, when children
Sure.
pretend play together,
Yeah.
there's transforming and perspective, orientation and perspective
Right.
can fit in there too. I need
Sure.
to think about that one more
And
observe more.
And it seems like, yeah, in pretend, you could have different kids sort of using different schema in the same process. I mean, the thing I love about pretend play is that you can be at different levels of social interaction. You can have the kid who's just a kitty and walks behind everyone and does all they have to do is say meow. And then you have the person, usually the mom, who's telling everyone what to do.
Yeah.
And then you have the kid who's going to like set the table, and all they want to do is spend 20 minutes putting out plates and then rearranging the plates and then whatever. And so all of those it allows for all these different schema happening at the same time. So it's a good like framework. One way that I saw myself use this a few months ago when I was first getting to know this child who has some sort of neurodivergent characteristics. And he was in the classroom, and I think I might have told the story on your podcast back in November for a different reason, but basically there were these superhero, I like to call them dolls, but they're usually called action figures because they're for boys.
Yeah.
Quote unquote. But he would set it on the shelf because he was laying on top of the shelf. Right. So I looked at it as a sensory reason why he was up there, not an orientation or positioning, but that could have been it too.
Yeah.
But then he would put a superhero on the shelf and then push it. So, and that's something I definitely see kids do with trajectory, pushing from a height. So then the thing goes out in a straight line at first before it arcs down, and depending on how fast you push it, it goes farther.
Change it. Yeah.
But so I put another superhero there, and he did the same. And, we kept doing it and doing it. And a child came over and looked at, and so in my head, I was using the little bit I knew about trajectory. He is really interested in watching this. And another child came over who is one of those kids that's always worried about the rules. And I was just the coach in this room. Partly one of the teachers had left. So I was sort of there was a sub in there too. And so I'm kind of helping out, but I'm just going with it. Right. They're like, this is great. And the kid comes over and it's like, I don't think he's supposed to be on the shelf. Or no, not think. He is not supposed to be on the shelf.
Okay.
It's like, and I just said, well, I think it makes him feel more comfortable. She's like, oh, okay. And then he's not supposed to be throwing those toys. It's like, oh, he's really interested in watching how they go in the air. She's like, oh. So then she's watching for a while, and then she finally says, wow, he's really good at this.
That's awesome.
And then after all the superhero dolls were on the floor, she put him back in the basket and brought him over, and she started doing it with him instead of me. So it gave me an opportunity to notice what he was doing. And this is a child of few words and and there's definitely some social interaction. He has a hard time explaining what he's doing.
Oh, okay.
But I also know that he can't take off his shoes without then throwing them across the room. Right. So it's telling me something.
Yeah.
So having this, even my little knowledge on schema theory gave me a chance of like, oh, I think this is the play for him right now. Yeah. And by being able to articulate that to a child, she was able to appreciate his play in a way that he would have been the kid, that, oh, ignore him, he's always throwing things.
Yeah.
So for me, so I don't want to, like, I'm just, I guess, reiterating that, like, I think schema can help with social development. I'm curious about if there's a lens in itself, or if that's a separate.
Yeah, thing. I need to go look at some of those other 32.
Yeah. and it may be that just the way we, as a field, value school readiness. Yeah. That those are the ones that, survived, and that she actually talked a lot about. Yeah. Or talked about the social aspect. But like I said, it could also just be the lens. And I'm, not saying that there's, the theory is useless just because it doesn't look at that, but just that it's interesting to me because it seems so obvious. And at the same time, I wouldn't say they're the same. Social connection and connecting objects
things,
is not
the same kind of
same.
connection. Yeah. But I think that even if there isn't a specific schema that can be connected to social interactions or development, embracing, allowing play because you know about schema will lead to more social practice
right
between the children.
Yeah, that's a great way to say it. I totally see that.
Yeah.
So then my other part of that, and this is actually what I thought of first.
Okay.
Yesterday we were recording a podcast about let me get the terminology. I liked it. Allowing for risky play for mastery-oriented thoughts instead of antiphobic effects. So in a sense, when a child's trying to do something, don't have them focus on what if you fall. Focus on reaching the next bar on the monkey bars or the next branch on the tree. And written in a very academic way. But as we were talking about it, I was like, oh, and I knew I was going to talk to you today. I was like, oh, I wonder if that's a schema, like the whole idea of the attraction to risky play. I'm curious if you see any connection. So are you familiar with the 5 types of risky
No.
play?
Well, I've heard them, but yeah. So, name them.
Great speeds, or whatever, great heights, rough and tumble. Oh my God, now I'm forgetting a few.
Good.
I named the ones that I thought fit orientation first.
They can Google for the rest of them, but
or fit schema first. Because I do think the heights and speed, there's something there. And then, I'm totally forgetting the others right now. But
I do think that, trajectory, for sure, moving things through space in different ways. That includes the body sometimes, and that can lead to some risky play or some great speeds.
I remember the other two. Dangerous elements and dangerous tools. But anyways,
the fire schema. Orientation and perspective. Things look different from up high than they do from down low. I think there's connecting and disconnecting whenever you're climbing. That could be part of that exploration. Rotation and circularity is a lot in how children use like merry-go-round and how they hold their bodies on those merry-go-rounds, standing or sitting or trying to stay up or laying flat. All gives them different, essentially, data. That's what this, when I do the workshop, I talk about the play schema as like a file folder, and they're getting all the information they can about that rotation. So if my file folder is rotation, then every experience I have where each
experience is another highlighter.
Another highlighter. I should use a highlighter metaphor instead of data. Absolutely. So like I said, even if we don't see a child neatly fit into, he's always pretty much exploring rotation. If we see them doing something that could fit in a rotation schema, that still gives us information for how to support what kinds of things to have around for them, and permission to allow it.
And what I like about that is telling teachers about the 5 types of risky play doesn't convince them to allow kids to do risky play. Speaking from a lot of experience, I'm in my mind, it's like, isn't that exciting? They want to do this. They really like tools, being able to use the tools, and not just the plastic ones, using the one that could cut them if they weren't being careful. But it doesn't help people. And this was the quote I was thinking of on Childcare Bar and Grill. You talked about the way that schema is the one through that seems to really help you get teachers to you just said sort of it connects to them, is all you said. And I actually wanted you to say more about if you have examples or just the ways that you see people connecting it. Because like I said, just telling them, isn't that great that they're climbing high because they like dangerous things? But the motivator probably is orientation. They're probably curious, what will it look like up there? And then they start to go up and their heart starts beating faster. And so then they have that other thing. But I think in some ways, the risky play is only observation. It doesn't get at why would they climb high? Why do they want to go fast? I mean, although honestly, the thrill. So that's where, there is something about getting your heart rating, the arousal state.
Sure. Yeah.
Is always a motivating factor.
Yeah.
But how do you see it helpful with teachers, with educators?
So I find it a lot with toddler teachers, actually, because so much of what toddlers do that confuses people, the filling and dumping and the just crawling over each other and acting like you don't even see the person in front of you, can actually sort of tie into patterns of these schema that help them understand, okay, so they're not just little weirdos. They're not just rude and egocentric, although they are egocentric, but in a different way than they're talking about. So it's toddler teachers that connect. But honestly, anytime I do the schema workshop, or like when I've worked with the graduate students at Purdue who hadn't had typically any kind of play education about play other than like gamification kind of stuff. But I can see their faces responding in a way that I don't always see in other presentations or workshops. And it's more common then that I will get someone who sends me like the pictures that Anne sends me and said, what schema is this? Or we're out in the classroom together and they'd be like, so this is what you're talking about. And I don't always get that when I talk just about the value of play or other ways that children benefit from play. So it's just,
and they wouldn't even see dumping toys as play. Without it. So that makes sense.
But like Anne sent me, I just have to tell another story about her toddler. She sent me a picture of this plastic hot dog on the toilet seat, like the closed toilet seat. And she's like, he carries this everywhere and just leaves it in the weirdest places. Well, that could be transporting. It could be transforming, you know, how does this hot dog look different in different spaces? Or it could just be, you know. And
yet who doesn't, have doing. Like if a child has pockets, things are
transporting, and what else do I fit enclosing and enveloping?
I would say enclosing,
things in their pockets. They're not little thieves. They're maybe exploring how to enclose this car completely in their pocket.
And you have to keep in mind that if you're going to have any holes, any empty baskets, anything in your room, it is going to get filled.
It's an invitation.
Which at the same time, I often say to toddler teachers, why don't you have a few extra containers that have nothing in them? Because what's going to happen is kids are going to take it out of one basket and put in the other. Not all the time, but that's one of the places. Tom Bedard from my podcast, who does a lot of stuff around sensory tables. The first thing he did was added a 5-gallon, pickle bucket, basically, in near the sensory table, because he knew that kids were going to scoop up stuff and then dump it on the floor. And he's like, oh, what if I put a bucket nearby? He never had to explain it. Or no, that's not totally true. What he would say is, rather than saying keep it in the the sensory table, he would say put it in the bucket. And they got so excited, so then they just would move it all over. And but I think there's that idea. I actually did some prep work for this conversation. I was in a toddler room and a kid was stacking blocks, like cardboard blocks, and then kicking them, or they were foam blocks in this case. And I, after having listened to one of the charts,
that's probably connecting or disconnecting.
It was the connecting and disconnect. That's what it was. And I said, oh, wow, look, the blocks are all over the floor now. I was just describing the position. So he laughed, set them up, should we do it again? Set it up again. He kicked them. And I said it one more time. And by the time I said it the second time, 3 other kids had now come over and were stacking. And we had run out of foam blocks. So then there were some tree cookies. So for one kid's like, do you want to do a 3 cookies? Like, and they are, real, they're not quite parallel. So you can only stack so high.
Neatly,
But the great thing is it would just fall. That child, they weren't even trying to make it fall necessarily. It would just fall over. Because the way he was kicking the foam ones, they're flying pretty far. I'd be a little worried if the wood ones were going quite as far.
And then they get the experience of, oh, this is new information. these softer blocks move differently than these tree blocks.
Right. Yeah. And that sense of it's this big, I kind of think of I was going to say Frobelian. I don't know if that's the word, but Froebel's like idea of unity, right?
Yeah.
That you'd have the blocks that he created, the Froebel blocks, all make one shape.
Yeah.
And then you can take them apart to make other shapes.
Yeah.
But
and that's
everything goes back to a cube or a sphere.
Yeah. The program where Chris Athey did her original research was called the Froebel Project, and it was originated.
There we go.
Yeah. So excellent connection.
Oh, thank you. That was on purpose.
Yeah. So I think we probably have to wrap it up. It's almost an hour. So I just want to, well, first, thank you. This was fun.
Yeah.
But also there was one other boy in the preschool who he was really obviously exploring enclosure and enveloping. Everything went inside something. He would pack just sort of, none of the materials inside the suitcase made any sense, but they were all together in there to carry around. Or when he painted, he would paint the whole paper. He would start by going around the edge and then paint the whole thing inside. And I didn't really have to do anything other than I didn't really use that information much because he was really competent to do that exploration himself. But it made me and so many other people just think, wow, isn't Freddie interesting?
Right. And I do think that that's the idea of approaching a child with curiosity. And even when we think of, even if there was some red flags for some sort of neurodivergence, first approach it with curiosity and just see if there's things that are affecting that child's life, affecting how they can do things. A diagnosis can help with services, but neurodivergence, neurodiversity as a concept, we all think differently. And so appreciating those differences and not worrying about somebody being different than another person, that another child would pack a suitcase based on, I'm going to, if they had a trip somewhere, I'm going to Disney World. So I have to pack a swimsuit. I have to, and they'd do it so differently. And instead, wow, isn't this interesting how he's just so interested in closing things. It doesn't even matter what it is.
Or he would crumple up paper into a wad and then just put it in a drawer and close the drawer.
Oh, that's great.
It's just so fun to watch him in all the different ways that I could see that. That's right.
And I bet 40 years from now, if you visit him wherever if he has an office or whatever, he's going to be doing something.
It's going to show up
very similar. Or just oh my God, I got this email. I have to put it into, I have these folders of where I put the different emails.
Yeah.
And I have to put it in there so that I feel okay, I've taken care of that. Whatever it is, I'm sure it's showing up.
Maybe later. That's my highlighting is transforming. It's a transforming schema.
There we go.
What else could it be? It could also be an enclosing schema.
Because when it's that paper where you highlight and then the highlighter goes away, it's
then I got to do it all again. Okay. Thank you, Mike. You're a good sport for doing homework for a podcast.
Sure.
Just because I wanted to talk about a topic.
Well, I'd like to think that I might actually use the information too.
Oh, okay. You probably. You're pretty smart guy. All right. Well, thank you. This was fun.
Yeah, thanks.
Can't wait to talk to you again, whatever topic it is. And thanks everybody for listening. We'll be back again with another episode next week.